Hello and welcome to Unit 4 about Sign Language Broadcasting. My name is Marta Bosch Baliarda and this is my sign name. In this unit, we are going to talk about sign languages as natural languages and also about the best practices for broadcasting sign language, either as sign language interpreted programs or sign presented programs. We will also discuss the translation and interpreting process for media broadcasting in sign language. And finally, we will introduce the possibilities of sign language technologies through signing avatars. Finally, in the last section of this video, you will find all the references that we will mention throughout this lesson. So let's start. What is sign language? In this section, we will talk about the main features of sign languages as natural languages, and we will discuss about the basic status of these languages, socially and linguistically. Also, it is very important to bear in mind that there are still a lot of misconceptions and preconceptions about sign languages and their users, deaf signing users. And we will also compare and discuss the differences between natural deaf sign languages and other communicative systems, such as alternative systems that use or that are partially based on signing and lexical signs. There are around 70 million sign language users around the world, and we have to bear in mind that when we talk about sign language users, we are talking, of course, about deaf users, deaf people, but also deaf-blind people and sometimes hearing people, for example, relatives and professionals that work within and with the deaf communities. Another important thing when we talk about deaf sign language users is that not all deaf people use sign language. Some deaf people use other communicative means, such as spoken language or alternative communicative systems, that we will explain later on in this section. In the literature, sometimes to differentiate these two linguistic communities within deaf people, we will find deaf with a capitalized D to refer to the deaf signers and deaf people that are culturally part of the deaf communities, and deaf with a lowercase d to refer to hard of hearing people or hearing impaired people that use spoken language or other forms of communication rather than sign languages. Another important thing is that sometimes when non-professionals use the term deaf and dumb to refer to the deaf people, to the deaf signers, it is important to know that this terminology is no longer used and is considered to have negative connotations, because deaf signers, they are not dumb, they can speak, but they choose to sign as their primary means of communication. It's not that they cannot talk, it is that they talk in a language that doesn't use an auditory modality, but a gestural and visual modality. And also, if they want to, most deaf people can use their voices to communicate too. When we talk about the linguistic status of sign languages, we have to go back to the 1960s, when the groundbreaking publication of sign language structure by William Stokoe was published. In this publication, it was clear that sign languages had fully fledged grammars, including phonology, morphology, and syntax. So sign languages are closer to spoken languages in their structure than to mimicking or gestural communication, for example. Sign languages are natural languages, just like any spoken language. but they differ in the language modality they use. Sign languages are visual gestural languages, and they use articulators like the hands, the arms, the facial expression like eyebrow position, mouthings, head tilts, and upper body parts like shoulder and torso positions to convey meaning and grammar in all the linguistic levels. For example, this is similar to what happens with spoken languages, but the body parts involved are different. In spoken languages, we use the vocal tract, mouth, lips, tongue to convey these patterns. And in sign languages, it's just other body parts. But the way they are conveyed, the structure is similar in both language modalities. So sign languages are fully fledged natural languages, and in all levels, like communicative level, cultural level, grammatically, etc. So for example, maybe you have never seen that before, but there are art forms like poetry in sign languages, and I want to show you a beautiful poetry in sign language of the Netherlands that is signed by the famous deaf poet Wim Emmerich that had just recently deceased. The poem is called Growth. The name of the poem is Growth, and you will see the beautiful visual patterns that are conveyed using this sign language. I hope you have enjoyed Wim's Emmerich poetry. Now, if you want to know more about sign languages as natural linguistic systems, you can read Sandler's and Lilo Martin's reading that you can have access in this online version. I hope you read this text and learn more about these natural languages. Okay, now that we are at the end of the first section, I have a question for you. Sign languages used by deaf communities around the world are A, fully fledged natural human languages, B, they are basic communication systems without a complex grammar, or C, they can only communicate utterances with simple vocabularies and no abstract meanings. The correct answer is, of course, that natural sign languages are fully fledged natural human languages. The correct answer is A. Now, we will talk about sign language misconceptions or preconceptions that affect both the languages but also their users, namely deaf signers or deaf sign language users. So, for example, maybe you're wondering why I'm using sign languages in the plural. Maybe you're thinking that sign language is the same in every country. And maybe you're wondering, after the question you just answered, that sign languages can only express concrete ideas and not abstract ideas. Or maybe you're thinking, is it really a language or is it closer to pantomime or mimicking? So we will try to talk about these issues involving sign languages and their uses. So this question, is sign language a universal system, is probably one of the misconceptions that are widely accepted. But no, this is not the case. There is not only one sign language for all countries. So far, linguists have described 138 different national sign languages, and they have been included in Ethnologue, which is the catalog of the world's languages. Here you can find the web link to access the complete list and some basic information about these different sign languages. Of course, we expect that more sign languages are described and discovered as linguistic research about the deaf communities around the world is continued and developed. But we said there's not a universal sign language, but is there any form of international sign language? And there is not exactly an international sign language, like a uniform sign language understood by all deaf signers, but there is an international sign system. This international sign system is invented so that deaf signers around the world, for example, when they meet in conferences or in international meetings, they can communicate using a very basic vocabulary that is understood by all the trained users. So this sign language international sign system is not understood by all deaf users, even though the visual properties of sign languages may help the signers' communicative skills when they face deaf users that use a different national sign language. If you want to know more about the international sign system, you can access the EUD, the European Union of the Deaf website, and you can find more information about this international sign system. So, if there's not one unique, standard, universal sign language, is there one sign language for every spoken language? Of course, I just mentioned earlier that there have been described 138 different sign languages, and for spoken languages, the number is much, much bigger, like around 5,000 spoken languages around the world. So the answer is no, there is not a different sign language for every spoken languages. But the main reason that the number of sign languages and spoken languages is so different is that sign languages are not a sign version of spoken languages. So sometimes what we find is that there's more than one sign languages within a country. And that is the case, for example, in Spain, when we have two distinct sign languages, Spanish Sign Language, or LSE, and Catalan Sign Language, or LSC. But also, the opposite case is possible, where different sign languages exist for one spoken language. And the most famous case is for English-speaking countries. So, for example, in the UK, they use BSL, or British Sign Language. And in the United States of America, they use ASL, or American Sign Language. And these two sign languages are barely understandable. So they are not historically related, the vocabularies are very different, and they differ also in their structures. And, of course, the same spoken languages, that is spoken English, is used in both countries. Actually, American Sign Language is related to French Sign Language, LSF, because the history of the deaf education in the United States is related to the French teachers for the deaf. Another important fact is that sign languages, just like spoken languages, vary. They have variation. So different regional dialects can be found within one national sign language. So we have to bear in mind that sign languages, they originate wherever a deaf community arises, and their origin is not related to the spoken languages of the territory. So the grammars are different, the lexical items are different, and their history is different too. So now you can see a an example of two different sign languages that are used within the American territory. This is a video developed by the University of Hawaii, and you will see American Sign Language and Hawaii Sign Language compared with basic vocabulary and basic syntactic structures. I hope you enjoy the video.
Father, mother, black, white, dog, pig.
Another misunderstanding or misconception is that sign language is sometimes mixed with finger spelling. So is really sign language finger spelling? That is, deaf sign language users use their hands and the shapes of their fingers to spell out words in air. And the answer is no. Sign language users are not spelling out words when they communicate. But finger spelling has sometimes been used as a code system to replace spoken languages whenever a deaf person cannot access the spoken language. And it has been used to supplement or replace spoken language and teach speech or print. So finger spelling is one of these alternative communication systems. And sign-based alternative and communication systems, sometimes they use the same signs of the national sign language of the territory, but they represent the grammar and the structure of the spoken language in the manual form. So they are not following the sign language grammar. Sign-based alternative communication systems are invented systems by hitting individuals, for example, hitting teachers for the deaf or speech therapists. And this contrasts with the natural origin of sign languages, which are not invented, but they are developed within the deaf communities. These sign-based communication systems or code systems are used for pedagogical purposes, and they are barely used outside the classroom by deaf people. So it's just like a technique to access print, to learn speech, but they are not used in a natural communication environment outside schools. So as I mentioned earlier, sometimes when we see a person using these sign-based systems or a person signing, if we are not native signers or if we are not, we don't have a basic command of sign language, it is very difficult to differentiate what they are actually using. But, and also because the signs that they use are the same lexical signs, although the grammar is not the same, because sign-based code systems follow the spoken language grammar, and sign languages have their own distinct grammar systems. So, some of the most common or widespread communication systems or augmentative systems are finger spelling, or what is called Rochester method or visible English. Rochester method is used in the United States, and visible English, it's the common name for the same method in the UK. And this method consists of spelling out every single word in a spoken sentence using the finger spelling, that is the alphabet that uses the manual signs. There's also a sign-supported English or bimodal systems or signed English, which is using the lexical signs of the national sign language, following the structure and the word order and grammar of the spoken languages. And barely all national sign languages can be used to produce or invent these bimodal system, and this is widely spread and used for pedagogical purposes, as I mentioned earlier. And also another augmentative system that helps lip reading or speech reading is cued speech, which is not based on the lexical items of the sign language, but just indicate different positions so that sounds that use the same lip pattern, for example, M, P, and B, can be differentiated by adding a manual sign that can help discriminate these sounds. So these systems, unlike sign languages, it's very important, they do not provide a natural language input for deaf children. They are very good systems for pedagogical purposes, to access speech, to access print, but using these systems to replace the linguistic input of a natural sign language could have a very negative impact on the deaf child's linguistic communicative development and skills. So it is important that deaf kids have access to a natural language, either a sign languages or a spoken language. And if you want to read more about this topic, please read this reference about Bavelier 2003. So, the differences between these communication systems and sign languages is that while natural languages arise spontaneously and spread by means of unrestricted interaction, they can be used in any communicative context for any communicative purposes. Artificial or device communication systems are invented by specific individuals, educators, for example, and can be used only in specific contexts for specific communicative uses. And here you can see the full reference of Bavelier's reading, and you will also find a reference in the reference section at the end of the video. Okay, so now we will answer question number 2. Sign languages around the world, A, are invented systems by hearing professionals and are a manual version of the spoken languages. B, have similar vocabularies because they are partially based on the International Sign System, or ISS. And C, are natural linguistic systems that have developed independently from spoken languages wherever a deaf community is found. And the correct answer is C. Sign languages around the world are natural linguistic systems. They have developed independently from the spoken languages, they have different grammars, and they arise wherever a deaf community is found.